Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today on a Saturday. I meant to do it on Tuesday, but it just was not going to happen. I've been meaning to do it all week. It's a great tag. It's from That Reading Guy. I'll leave a link to his video down below. It's the Snob-O-Meter Tag. How do you gauge where you fall on the Snob-O-Meter? I've seen, since he posted the tag, I've seen a number of great responses to it. Uh, and I'm glad of that. I'm glad that a lot of people are doing it. I wish that a lot more people would do it because it's a subject that comes up. When you're dealing with reading, it's a subject that comes up. I have been dealing with book snobs my whole life, my whole reading life, because I came to reading late. So the first people I encountered were book snobs who thought that if I came to reading late, that means I shouldn't read at all. And then every step of the way after that. And this tag is designed for you to gauge how much of a book snob you are. So I'm glad that the first question is, what is your definition of book snobbery? Because we need to define our terms here. It's important, for instance, judging from some of the videos that I've seen responding to this tag, it's important for us to acknowledge that having preferences is not the same thing as being a snob. Of course, the fact that you like romantic poetry more than you like military history doesn't mean you're a snob. It means you have a preference. Nothing wrong with that. I would define snobbery by referencing a few mistakes that are made when it comes to books and reading just in general. And there are two essential mistakes that are sort of bound up with each other. One is something I've mentioned on this channel many times before. In fact, I did a video about it, which is that there is a mistaken perception in the world and also in the reading world, but also in the world in general. There's a mistaken perception that there is a hierarchy of creative forms. There is not. There is not a hierarchy of creative forms. There is no such thing as that this creative form, just in general, regardless of who does it, regardless of examples, this creative form is better or somehow more worthy or whatever than this creative form. That is not true. That assertion, almost always made on the part of snobs, is not true. There is no creative hierarchy of forms. Classical stone neoclassical sculpture is not inherently in and of itself better than a rom-com romance novel. If I'm making myself clear here. Everything, all of it, the whole world and everything in it, the entire universe, the entire multiverse, everything comes down to execution. You don't get any credit for form. So, I have seen classical, neoclassical sculptures that are terrible. And I have read rom-com romance novels that are great. And the people who look at the neoclassical sculpture and say, it's elevating. And it's not like that trash that you're reading. Couldn't do either. And wouldn't be any good at either, even if they studied for 20 years. So that's thing number one that we need to clarify here, that I need to repeat, is that there is no hierarchy of creative forms. All creative forms are the same. It's only a question of skill. It's only a question of execution. And wrapped up in that is the second opening contention that I want to make, that I've made on this channel a few times. Not quite sure how many people really get what I'm talking about here. It's I think, a much more important assertion than most people give it credit when I just blurt it out at parties over wine and calzones. And that is that reading has no moral dimension. There is no moral dimension to reading. Can we percolate with that for a minute? There is no moral dimension to reading. Plenty of bad people love to read. Plenty of good people don't love to read. Plenty of bad people write good books. Plenty of bad people write good books. Reading itself is just words on a page. It has no moral dimension at all. Oftentimes in the first contention there, when people say there is a hierarchy of creative forms, what they're saying is not that it's a hierarchy in terms of difficulty. That they're not saying it's harder to do a marble sculpture of a faun than it is to write a rom-com romance. Some people will say that. They're absolute morons. They don't know what effort it takes in either case to do. And couldn't do either one, as I say. They haven't put their toe in the water at all. But a lot of times when people say there's a difference in skill, what they mean is there's a difference in moral. That one is more morally uplifting than the other. That is false. There is no moral dimension to any of this. And I think you'll see when you take those two opening contentions and mix them together, that there's no hierarchy of creative forms, of aesthetic forms, there is none, doesn't exist, and that there's no moral element to reading, once you mix those two together, you will see that snobbery almost certainly comes from insecurity. I have made a little beginning at reading such and such or so and so. And I now know enough to know how much I have not read, how much I'm never going to read. I now know enough to know that. I can see that. And it makes me insecure. The surest way, there are two ways that people respond to that. One is to just rule out all the rest of it. Well, I only read literary fiction. All the rest of it's not worth my time. And that's your way of dealing with the insecurity of knowing that you're never going to read more than a fraction of all the rest of it. And that when you start to read military history or social ethnography or whatever, you're going to start as a raw beginner knowing nothing and making lots of mistakes. That's a bad feeling. I know that. You know that. But that's how you learn. You start there. And no matter what it is, you start there. Most people, many people, will do anything to avoid that feeling, how bad that feels. Anything. That's why they don't learn languages. That's why they don't learn any kind of field of study other than the ones that they know embryonically already. They just won't do it. And that accounts for extremely cloistered one-genre-only readers, is that they say, oh no, the rest of it's not worth my time. They use snobbery for insecurity reasons. And the same thing is true with looking down on people for what they like to read. That also is insecure. That also is born ultimately of insecurity, which you'd think would make me sympathize. But I don't at all. I hate book snobs. I hate them. I hate snobs just in general, but I hate book snobs more than ever, more than any other kind of snob, because I was dealing with them from a very early age and have dealt with them my whole life. I elicit snobbery. Maybe not now, because I'm as old as dirt now, but when I was a lot younger, I would elicit snobbery from people without meaning to. We would be talking, I'd be in a group of people, we'd be talking enthusiastically about what we read, just lately what we read, and I would mention, I just this morning finished the latest Robert Silverberg science fiction novel, and would get the predicted responses. Or I would say, just this afternoon I reread The Quick and the Dead by Louis L'Amour, and there's a lot going on there. There's one thing that really confuses me. Now we're talking about books, I'd love to talk about it, and I look around and see that the whole tenor of the room has changed. I've been dealing with these creatures my whole life, my whole reading life. Before my reading life, I didn't care, of course. But so I view book snobbery as people who do think that there is a hierarchy of creative forms, of aesthetic forms, and who think there is a moral element to reading, and that think that they are on the high end of both those things. Sorry, I promise my answers won't all be this long. Question number 2, is there a genre or type of book you would never consider reading? Such as, would you ever read a romance? Or if you regularly read romance, would you ever try a science fiction novel? In answer to the question, is there a type of book you would never consider reading? For me, probably not. I hesitate because I don't want to read apologia for fascism. I don't want to read Trump books. And there's going to be a slew of them. This baby, I'm not over there. Do you want to come back over here? Come on, you could do it. There you go. There you go. You do this every day. You go over there and there you go. She jumps over there because it's an adventure, and then she realizes I'm not there. So she wants to come back over here because this is where she wants to be, wedged against me. Sorry. Oh, right. You might think, I might even say, the reason why I'm a little hesitant on this point is because I don't want to read Jared Kushner's next book. I don't want to read Steve Bannon's next book. But never consider reading? I don't want to read those things. This is extremely serious. I take this extremely seriously. That my country, the greatest country in the history of the world, the most powerful country in the history of the world, has fallen to fascism. That is a hinge point of history. Like most hinge points of history, most people in the world don't see it. But it's one of the most important hinge points of history that has ever been. And it's entirely negative. There are no positives to it. It's evil. So the bumper crop of books coming out from major publishers, not anymore from Counterpoint Books or Bulwark Books or whatever. These are going to come out from Random House and Penguin. celebrating that fall. Of course, I would, right now, I'd like to think I would never consider reading them, but I probably will. My curiosity always gets the best of me. So I would say no, there is no type of book that I would never consider reading. I say right now that I hate the very thought of those books and I avoid them. But probably the bigger ones, the more important ones, the Gehring and Goebbels books, I will read. We'll see. I'll drag you all through it. But that, I guess my underlying point is that wouldn't be snobbery. It wouldn't be me saying that it would be me saying that this is personally distasteful to me, not morally, not that this is a lesser form of art. I have read apologetic memoirs from the leading Nazis 100 years ago. I've read those books, as loathsome as they are. I've read Mein Kampf a couple of times. It's not a question of, oh, I wouldn't waste my time. We'll go through it at the time. I don't want to make every answer 20 minutes long. Question number 3 is, does erotica count as literature? Yes. Although I know that reading guy here is using literature as a synonym for something other than just the written material of the day, which is what it is. Literature is the written material of the day. Literature is how, removing the middle syllable is usually how I characterize and satirize what people mostly think of as literature, that it's not just the written material of the day, but the better literary material of the day. And if you want to judge that on critical grounds, fine. But people don't. Instead, they think of it in terms of the 2 points that I made at the beginning. They think of it as the moral element of it. Where does this literature with a capital L rank on the hierarchy of aesthetic forms? Erotica is the literature of the day. So yeah, it is literature. That doesn't mean it's good literature. The kind of literature that I think being implied in this question has a capital L and is assumed de facto to be good. I'm not making any such assumptions. Question number 4, is it better to read classic books than popular bestsellers? See what I mean? Better. In other words, more virtuous. What else does it mean by better? What else does better mean? It takes inches off your waistline? adds luster to your hair? No, it means it's more virtuous, which means more moral. There is no moral element to reading. There is no moral element to reading. There is no such thing as, the old phrase in my youth was, an improving book. There is no such thing as an improving book. In fact, some of the books most damaging to you, most damaging to your happiness, your health, and your view of the world are self-help books designed to improve you. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. There's no moral element to reading. So is it better to read? Better here has only one yardstick. Here and across the board of reading, it has only one yardstick. Are you going to like it more? That's the only yardstick. So is it better for me to park you in front of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire than it is for me to park you in front of the new James Patterson? If you remove the idea that there is a moral element here, there is no moral element in reading. If you remove that idea, well, then what can better mean in this circumstance other than which is better for you? And if you don't like or are not conditioned to read Gibbon, then you're going to like James Patterson. If you've read James Patterson your whole life, you're probably going to enjoy that. And the whole point of your reading is to enjoy what you read. So that would be better. My qualification here, my elaboration here would be that the more complicated, more complex, the more in-depth types of reading, you can learn to like them. You can learn how to read them. You can get more experience with reading them. And it is entirely possible that they will please you more when you do, that your enjoyment will be greater because a whole lot more work went into them. It's going to show. It's going to show. How many airport thrillers have you read in the last 10 years that were just blah? They just sat there. Or romantasy novels that are churned out almost exclusively by AI. And it shows. You've got a human barely doing some editing, but it's all very flat and very one-dimensional. It's not a question of better or worse. It's not a question of the moral element. It's a question of whether or not you're going to enjoy that. And you're a lifelong reader. You're not going to enjoy something that's bad. Not in the negative, not in the moral sense of bad, but poorly done. You're not going to enjoy that as much as something that is expertly done. It's just that some things that are expertly done take a little training. They take a little practice for you to learn to read them and enjoy them. I assure you, I am not reading Gibbon in order to lord it over anybody. I assure you, I'm not reading Mommsen or Samuel Eliot Morison or anything. I'm not reading these people to lord it over anybody. I'm reading it this stuff because I love it. I'm reading this current, real, serious history because I love it. I didn't start out loving it. Anyway, let's see here. Question number 5. Have you ever bragged about reading a classic in order to sound smart? No. No, I never have. I know the people who don't watch my channel and just see thumbnails will think, oh, this is a pompous old guy, so I know he must act this way, and have actually gone on Reddit and other forums and just said that. Just said that I act smart all the time, that I condescend, that I make fun of people for what they read. I've seen comments like that. People who have never watched a single video that I've ever made in 9,000 videos. It's okay. People are going to do that. I am accustomed to that's a lesson of the internet. People are going to do that no matter what. There's nothing you can do to stop that from happening. But no, I never have. I don't want to sound smart. I don't care what people think of me in that regard at all. And also, I don't know if you've noticed on this channel, but I tend to keep the company of people who are much smarter than I am. So I love that. I actually love that feeling. So that disinclines you from trying to sound smart, because you'd be torn apart by such people in a minute. So no, I never have. Question number 6. Do audiobooks count as reading? What about comic books or graphic novels? Let's clear up another thing here. We cleared up at the beginning that having a preference is not being a snob, unless you're demeaning other people's preferences for no reason whatsoever, other than that you think there's a moral element to reading. We cleared up that misconception. We cleared up there's no moral element to books. There's no moral element to them at all. There is no hierarchy of aesthetic forms. All aesthetic forms are the same. It's all about execution. We cleared up a lot of those. Let's clear up a little bit of gaslighting as well, shall we? Shall we do that? Reading is a personal interaction with a text without an intermediary. Okay, all right. So you reading aloud before St. Ambrose, you reading silently after St. Ambrose, you reading in Braille, fine. You are personally encountering a text without an intermediary. Audiobooks are you encountering a text through an intermediary. They are just demotically, just in terms of definition, it is not reading. It's something else. In the 21st century, we have all fallen into the trap of using that horrible word consuming, a way of consuming a book. Now, you are hearing a story. You are hearing someone tell you a story. The gaslighting involved on this subject, I know it's a vexed question on book 2, but only because the 21st century is the century of gaslighting, where you can say, here is an apple, and you are holding a pumpkin, and you are just staring into the eyes of the person you're talking to see if they will say that is not, in fact, an apple. Reading has a definition. It is a thing. It doesn't mean that anyone's thinking less of you for listening to someone tell you a story, for you listening to an audiobook. That it doesn't mean any degradation at all, but they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. So, do audiobooks count as reading? No, they don't. They count as some form of you're being told a story, definitely, but you're not privately encountering the work. Whole elements of that work, whole elements of your first encounter with that work are out of your hands. They are in the hands of the person who's reading it to you. That's not the same thing. Those are two different things. Not one that's inherently less than the other, but they are not the same. Anyway. And then the second part is, what about comic books or graphic novels? Well, comic books that don't have any words are clearly not reading. but the ones that do they have pictures and words. Then question number 7, have you ever looked down at someone for reading a popular fluff book, a book with little substance, for example, a self-help book or a celebrity memoir? No, I have not. Again, I know that there is a small but vocal subdivision of Reddit or whatnot that says that I not only have, but that I build my whole life on doing that. Nope, not true. And you can say that without watching any of my videos, but you can't show me any evidence of it, not where I'm being earnest. I mock people and tease them all the time. I love to tease people, especially the more I like people, the more comfortable I feel, the more I love to do that. And I consider myself here on BookTube, in this little corner of BookTube, to be among friends. So I like nothing better than teasing people. But in earnest, no, I've never done that. As many people have said in response to this question, I would be missing a great opportunity if I did that. If you look down on somebody and tell them that, you lose everything. You close every door. You will never shame someone into reading better books, into reading more complicated books, more rewarding books. You'll never shame them into doing that. All you'll do if you do that is make them hate you. My question, when somebody reads what you'd call a fluff book, although I've read, maybe not self-help books, but I've read celebrity memoirs that were very good, that really deserved attention. Not on the celebrity's part, keep in mind. Celebrities are as dumb as barnyard animals. They don't write their own memoirs. But in terms of whoever it was who actually got whipped and beaten to do the book, that work deserves merit. And yes, I'm including Trevor Noah. Okay? Jeez. It's a very good book. Born a Joke is a very good book, but he's as dumb as a box of celery. He didn't write it himself, for Pete's sake. Let's grow up a little. Anyway. Oh no, am I looking down on celebrities? Anyway. No, the proper response when someone reads something that you consider fluff, first of all, you shouldn't consider it fluff, because why? There's no hierarchy of aesthetic forms. There's no fluff except in execution. But the main reason is that you're missing an opportunity to ask them all about it. How many readers do you know, for Pete's sake? So you know somebody who just read the latest, I don't even know, name a fluff book. Whatever it is, you're far better use of your time and theirs to ask them what they thought of it. Talk about it with them. Maybe make suggestions. A lot of times the word that is being used here is fluff. A lot of times that will be a synonym, a stand-in for a low-effort book. Something that was dashed off. Something that doesn't have much to recommend it. And in almost all cases of such a book, there will be numerous examples of books that are slightly better, substantially better, hugely better. Same type of book. In almost all cases, that will be true. So you can gently or earnestly recommend something that you already know is the type of thing this person likes, but that is a better book. Not better in the moral sense, but better in the sense of execution. You lose that opportunity if you look down on somebody. Let's see here. Question number 8. Have you ever been the recipient of someone else's snobbery? Ooh, yes. Many, many times. Many times. It doesn't happen so much in the last 20 years or so. It doesn't happen so much. I'm a published book critic, a widely published book critic. And I'm also visibly older. So people don't feel quite as comfortable showing their snobbery now. And the critical world doesn't feel quite so comfortable doing that, considering how many books their snobbery was going to cause them to overlook that I shoved under their nose and said, you should pay attention to this. And then they did, and then the rest of the literary world did. That's happened a number of times. So a number of people know, just on pragmatic reasons, I shouldn't dismiss this. But apart from those pragmatic business, critical reasons, it's pretty tough to openly express snobbery to someone who's blurbed on the Bible. It's pretty tough to openly express snobbery to somebody who's really, really old, but not the glassy-eyed kind of I don't really know where I am old. Rather the unsettling kind of old, the handful of old people who are still have a few tacks in the ring. It's harder to do that. But when I was younger, yes, lots of snobbery, lots of it. To the point where occasionally I would have to call people up on it. I would have to snap their leashes because they'd be going on and on about the Louis L'Amour thing, about The Quick and the Dead. Oh, you read a Western? Oh, really? It was a shoot 'em up. Was it all exciting? Do you think the author spent more than a day writing it and whatnot? Occasionally, if conversations like that went on a little too long, I had to remind the speaker of all the stuff that they don't consider dumb fluff, that I know much, much better than they do. Much, much better than they do. So, and all the stuff that, for instance, is in the Greek and Roman classics world. that they've only barely skimmed. They've skimmed it just enough to sound pretentious about it. They know I haven't. They know I've lived with these people, word by word, line by line. And it did work to snap their leash, but I have encountered that many, many times, yes, including random strangers on subways. Before COVID and before e-readers and phones, people used to read magazines, newspapers, and books on crowded subways all the time, and the subways were crowded. And, whatever I pulled out of my shoulder bag on those commutes was whatever I happened to be reading at the time. I paid no attention to anything like that. So I would pull out a romance novel, or a Western, or a lurid science fiction novel with a big robot on the cover, and I wouldn't care at all. And occasionally I would get snickers from people. So yeah, I have been. There's only one time where I evinced snobbery on my own, a story that I've told on this channel a few times, where I had a serious book in my duffel bag, and I also had The Relic by Preston, a novel about a monster that gets loose in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. A wonderful novel. And I was reading The Relic. I was just turning pages. It's exactly what it's supposed to do. When our plane hit real turbulence, this was back when I used to fly. We were at 30,000 feet and we hit real turbulence. It was rocking the plane, slamming people up and down. The gas mask, the air mask coming down from and everything. It looked like we were going to be in serious trouble. First airplane flight that I ever had where I actually felt this plane might break apart. And in panic, in that moment, I put Relic in the bag and took the serious book out and put it in my hand. Because in my mind, I was thinking, if the plane breaks apart and my body ends up in a sheep field somewhere, I want them to see that I was reading a good book. The plane, we were fine in 15 minutes, and I had never gone back. The minute I could look back on what I'd done, I felt how ridiculous that was, and I've never gone back. I've never done anything like that again. Question number 9 is, would you ever be friends with a snob? Maybe you are already. Well, not to put too fine a point on it, Book 2, but I am friends with a lot of snobs. A lot of you are snobs. A lot of you are. A lot of you have not fully taken on board the wisdom of Steve, which is there's no moral element to reading and there's no hierarchy of aesthetic forms. Most of you simply do not believe that second one. You just won't believe it. As far as you're concerned, a big fat biography is inherently better in a moral sense than a short romance. And if I can't convince you to dispense with that kind of wrong thinking, then I don't think anything can. I think you'll just go on your life that way. It's possible to be friends with book snobs. I have been friends with book snobs. It's most social snobs don't want anything to do with me because I eat food that my dog and I find on the sidewalk. If you've ever seen me eat spaghetti, then you can't be a social snob and have anything to do with me. But book snobs, sure. Yeah, it's as long as they're doing some reading, that's fine by me. I wish that they weren't book snobs, but there's nothing that can be done. As long as you are under the mistaken impression of those first 2 points, snobbery is going to be the defense mechanism that you do to deal with your insecurity. It's the easiest one. It's right to hand. Question number 10 is, are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? I don't know that I would use the word sophisticated here because that seems loaded to me with judgments, much like better. It seems loaded with judgments, personal judgments. I'm sure that you know plenty of wise people, nuanced and in-depth people who don't read at all. And so do I, and I've known plenty of them. And of course, all of my best friends when I was a child did not read and could not read. Sophisticated is a word that I would probably avoid. But there is something that a real energetic reader, especially a non-snobby reader, will have. There's an element they'll have that is missing in a non-reader. I don't know that I would call it sophistication. I might call it layering. I mean, reading is a way for you to take on the opinions, the life experiences of other people in a way that simply hearing them does not do. It does all kinds of things to you, to your aesthetic perception of the world. As I always say, it is your open invitation to a total stranger to move into your mind and move around the furniture, if they can. That's a serious thing. That's a serious risk. And non-readers don't make that risk. They don't ever. There is no other way to do it. They don't make that risk. And there's a real value. It changes you as a person to be willing to do that. And not only to be willing to do it, but to have it happen. Books can change you. They can move around your mental furniture, and that process is not there in a non-reader. So I don't know that it doesn't make them less sophisticated, but there is something missing. And it's not like they get that compensatorily from somewhere else. They don't. It's just an element of their world that's smaller than the world of a reader. Most really, the kind of readers that we are. I'm not talking about people that munch their way through a book without really thinking, or read a bunch of self-help books wanting to confirm their pre-existing worldview. If you open a book and the thing you do to the total stranger who wrote it is to lock and bar the door, then I don't know what you're doing. I honestly don't know what you're doing. I guess you're stoking snobbery. You're giving yourself all sorts of points that you can bring out in conversation against other people. Now, when you open a book, you have to open the door. You have to let the person in. All right, I'm going to read this. I'm going to go at you with an open mind. The first stupid thing you say will close my mind a little. The next stupid thing you say will close my mind a little more. It could be that by chapter 3, I know you're a moron and I shouldn't listen to you. But I'm not just opening the book. I'm opening my mind. So I'm welcoming you in. Take your best shot. Let's try this. There are plenty of people, I'm sure you know people who call themselves readers, but the first thing they do when they open a book is to close their mind. I don't know about them, but for us, reading does something that it adds something to our lives that non-readers don't have, and they don't get it from anywhere else. So I don't know exactly what I would call that. C.S. Lewis famously said that it just means their world is smaller than yours, and you wouldn't want to live in it. You like them, fine. You love them even, but you wouldn't want to live in their world. And then question number 11, measure yourself. Based on your answers to the previous 10 questions, would you qualify as a book snob? I'd like to think that I would not qualify as a book snob at all, since I don't feel snobbery on these things. But I'm curious to know what you think. Of course, this is a great troublemaking tag designed to see just how guilty you are of snobbery. I firmly believe that if you are guilty of snobbery, it will be because you are guilty of the first two misapprehensions. And that you've just run with them your whole life. And maybe they're so ingrained in who you are now that you can't get rid of them. That'd be a shame, but I bet that would be true. That is where snobbery tends to come from in this area. But all that's left here to do is tag people. Of course, I tag anybody who hasn't done this already. You absolutely should. Robin Song Reads, I haven't heard from you in a long time. Kevin Toll, have you done the Snob-O-Meter Tag? Have you done that? Kevin reads a lot of the popular, what we might call airport books, that are the prime targets for snobbery. In any other community but this one, they would be the prime targets for snobbery. Have you ever experienced? I'd love to hear your answers. And also, while we're tagging people here, I want all of you to do this. This is a great subject to bring up. But we might also mention Janet Wertman. I've mentioned Janet Wertman before, the novelist. She writes Tudor historical fiction. And little known to anybody is that she has a channel. It is, I think it's called Too Much Tudor. I'll leave a link to it down below. When I was last at her channel, she was doing a bookshelf tour that was pretty sparse. Not because I'm a snob and I'm looking down on her, but because her house was wiped out by the California wildfires. And with it, a library that I had helped her to build, in part. The books that she got from the Prattle when she was last here. Wiped out. Cinders. So that is, I saw the sparse books flopping around on her empty shelves, and I was all ready to make fun of her. But that's a pretty good reason. That's a pretty good reason to have very few books. But when I was last at her channel just a few days ago, she had 11 subscribers. This is a published author, Tudor expert, gives lectures. I want to get that number up and welcome her into BookTube. So I, of course, want to know your answers as well. If you're watching, Janet, I want to know your answers. Are you a book snob, and to what extent? And if in the course of your response video you feel like instructing us a little, telling us a little about what book snobbery was like in Tudor times, feel free. Not that she needs any encouragement to geek out. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. That was the Snob-O-Meter Tag. Sorry for the delay, but I wasn't up to it, and I wanted to be up to it because this subject means a lot to me. I've experienced a lot of it in my life. But anyway, do this tag if you haven't already, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.